Well, hey there. It is time to start our lunchtime webinar. Stop asking stupid questions. My name is Jen Mueller. I'm the one who created the webinar and who created the process for asking better questions. We have about 30 minutes together. We're going to zip through a process for turning the obvious question into a better question. And by better question, I mean a more strategic question. And there's a reason that we want to do this. Now, I will say that this training was created before everything started happening in this country and before we all started working remotely, before there was really a need to adjust our work habits. And as I thought about what we were doing and asking better questions, I also started thinking about it in context of working remotely. And I think it is important to make sure that we are really dialing in those conversation strategies around our question asking, because we need to be very clear when working with remote teams. And we need to make sure that our efforts aren't being duplicated or wasted, that we're not on video conferencing calls any longer than we need to be, because our time is still valuable and we still have work to do. Which brings us to doing a little bit of work today. I know that it is noon in the Pacific Northwest and I am still sipping on a cup of coffee, mainly because I didn't sleep well last night. So if you see the mug, it says, she believed she could, but she was tired. So here is my question for you, and please use the online chat feature to submit your answer. You ready? When did coffee become part of your daily routine? When did coffee become part of your daily routine? Just type it in there to the chat. Tell me the story as to how the coffee became part of your daily routine, when it happened. I will tell you that I grew up in Texas. It is 95 plus degrees every day during the summer. The thought of drinking something hot was not something that I was going to do. I went to college, never drank coffee. I moved to the Pacific Northwest. I still resisted drinking coffee. And then I started working crazy hours in sports, and I worked a couple of jobs to make sure that I could pay the bills. Jill says that she has been drinking coffee since 1991. Yeah, you've been at it a little bit longer than I have, Jill, because I've only been at it for about 15 years. But I will also say that when I first started drinking coffee, at least what I thought was coffee, it was mochas. And I gained about 15 pounds. And then I actually watched the barista at Starbucks make the mocha and put in 4 pumps of chocolate. And I realized that what I was really drinking was chocolate syrup. And I needed to wean myself off of that. So I am now this day just drinking black coffee with just a splash of cream. So that is how coffee became part of my daily routine. Benjamin says that he was in the Air Force. He's been drinking it since then. Jill was working at a brokerage firm and had to be ready for the market to open at 6 a.m. Yep, that would absolutely do it. Jen says early in college, that's when she started drinking coffee. Crew practices, classes, yeah, studying late. That would make the most sense, but I just was late to the party on that one. Eric, since the 80s, iced, yep, that's a good one. I'm not as much into the iced, but I get that one. And then Hanifa in college. Yeah, hated the taste as a kid. I got to be honest, I used to need something to sweeten it up. And now I just like it. And I like it as part of my morning routine just to smell the coffee. Okay, I want you to hang on to that. If you haven't answered, go ahead and put your answer in there. We're going to come back around to that in just a minute. Here's what else we're going to get around to today. We're going to talk about how a question evolves from the initial thought of the question to a more strategic and intentional question. During that process, you will understand why 2 iterations is my baseline for asking a better question and what that actually means. And then understanding why thinking about yourself and understanding how you would respond to a question is really important in making sure that you are asking good questions. And there's a lot of different reasons that we need to be asking good questions. And it's important to understand this. When we think about good questions versus bad questions, or good questions versus stupid questions, there is no one category of question that is good or bad. So for example, the folks who say you should always be asking open-ended questions to start a conversation are wrong. Open-ended questions, and you'll see why in just a few minutes, don't always lead to the conversation that you need to be having, right? You can get people talking without actually getting the answers that you need. On the flip side, yes, no questions aren't always bad. There are times where a yes, no question is the exact right thing to ask. The game of 20 questions. While it might seem like you are showing a lot of interest in somebody, asking more questions doesn't mean that you're more interesting. It doesn't mean the conversation is going to be better, and it doesn't mean that the connection is going to be better. What we're trying to do is get to the point where we are asking questions that get people to reveal who they are and what the real issue is that we are trying to solve. So I have discovered that in 20 years working in sports broadcasting, literally thousands of interviews with hundreds of athletes, a great question leads people to reveal more than they expected 98% of the time. Which brings us back to our question about coffee. I very easily could have shown you my coffee cup and said, hey, who out there drinks coffee? And just had you type in a yes or raise your hand or say, every morning I drink coffee. But when you change the question just a little bit, I learned more about each one of you because of the answer to that question. And that's what we're trying to get at. We want a question that gets us to where we ultimately want to go in the conversation. And I love this picture of Nelson Cruz because I just think about driving a conversation, right? It's not just that somebody else is along for the ride with us and that we're having this conversation. It's that we're driving the conversation because great questions allow us to identify the real issues so that you can showcase your value and expertise while enriching the story. Now let's break down each one of these things just really briefly on what it means. And don't forget, you can pop in questions anytime you want. In fact, let me just pull the chat back up here. So, oh, nope. Let's pull the chat back up here. Yes, so you can pop in questions to that chat anytime that you would like during the course of the conversation. Ask me a question. We'll break that one down. But here's what we're talking about here. Identifying the real issues. So if you saw the Seattle Times article that I published on this very topic a couple weeks ago, I used the example of coffee and a barista. And when a barista asks, what can I get you? And you order a coffee, they're not really getting to your real issue, right? And so the example was, if the barista had asked a more strategic question, I would have been able to reveal that I'm exhausted because I'm not sleeping well, I still have presentations to do, and I'm worried about everything that's going on. The issue is not that I am dying of thirst and that coffee is the only thing that's going to quench my thirst. My issue is I'm stressed out and I'm not sleeping well and I'm fatigued. And that would allow the barista to offer a suggestion of also picking up a protein plate and a bottle of water, just so that I had those things on hand and it was one less thing for me to worry about. If we're talking about a sales conversation and the potential buyer or client says, well, it's a budget issue. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Maybe the real issue is, look, I'm not sure how to communicate to folks that the value that you are giving me exceeds the price of this license for my company to use your software. And my real issue is I don't know how to take that to the higher ups, right? That's a different issue than I truly don't have budget for it. We're going to have to circle back around when we set the budget for next year. You want to be able to showcase your value and expertise as quickly as you can in a conversation without overstepping and trying to shortcut that relationship process. So if we are talking about, let's say, making a sale, right? You can't just jump to, okay, what's it going to take for me to get your money? What's it going to take for me to get your business, right? That's not what it is. We have to have a relationship so that I feel that we understand each other, and then I can help you solve the problem. And when we talk about enriching the story, here's what I want you to think about. You know, oftentimes questions are seen as a means to an end. But in my line of work as a broadcaster, they're part of the story. So here's what makes the questions I ask different than the ones that you would ask on a regular basis. Number one, they are done in extreme time frames and time crunches, right? Most of the conversations that I have on live TV or radio are less than 90 seconds long. That means that I get to ask about 3 questions. And it means that I can't ramble with those questions. I can't ask a 6-part question. And I have to ask a question that gets to the heart of the issue, because every single person who is listening to that interview can hear the question. My questions don't get edited out. If you are writing for the Seattle Times or a publication where it's not an online medium, like a TV, radio, video sort of medium, you can ask 20 questions. The audience never hears your questions. You just get kind of the quote that you need. But my questions are part of the story, which means that they need to be a little bit more strategic. I don't have time to waste. I need to get to the point where that athlete is going to answer the question in a way that benefits not only him or herself, but that intrigues the audience enough, and so that the question is sparking the right conversation. Hopefully, this makes sense. The video with all the dogs. So the 2 iteration part. When we are thinking about conversation, or when we are thinking about questions, excuse me, there's going to be the first question that comes to mind. Now, again, if I'm on a really tight time frame, if my questions are part of the story, if I'm trying to showcase my value and expertise by getting athletes to reveal more about themselves than they expected to or than they thought, I need to really think through the first question that I come up with and see if there's a way to make some strategic revisions so that I can get a better answer. Let's go back to the example that I had you answer earlier. Like I said, the question could have been, do you drink coffee? That is the initial question. But if I'm thinking about 2 revisions and I tried to update that conversation or that question just a little bit, the question could sound something like, when did you start drinking coffee? That would give me just a little bit more context about who you are and your love or dislike of coffee. But if we go one step further and I put myself in your shoes, the shoes of the person being asked a question, I can make another revision, and the question becomes, when did coffee become part of your daily routine? That's an example of 2 iterations or 2 strategic revisions of your original question. Make sense? Okay, now let's see how we got there. So the evolution of a question, there's actually 5 things that we need to do when asking a better question. You will get this as part of your recording later on. This is a great screen to go through. Now, it does not mean that I never ask the first question that comes to mind. What this process allows me to do is run the questions that I'm thinking about through a filter to know if it really is the best question or whether I can tweak it just a little bit. Now, I will tell you that I do this in varying degrees of time. So if I'm preparing to go to spring training, like I was during November, December, and January, I'm going to spend a lot of time really thinking about the questions, making a lot of revisions, thinking about the objective. But if something is happening in the 8th inning of a game and I am doing an interview in the bottom of the 9th inning, well, then you can go through this process a lot faster. The first thing we need to do anytime we ask a question is identify the objective. So what do I want to get out of a question? We're going to do a revision with this question that I listed here. What is it like being on the road during the season? Now, let me back up and explain something here. Every year when I go to spring training, I am tasked with doing a number of things. It's not just getting interviews with the players, it is getting them to show their personality and their sense of humor and to getting to know them away from the field. It's really difficult to set up a scenario where they just laugh on cue, or where they kind of spontaneously launch into a story about their childhood. It is up to me to create that scenario in the questions that get asked. So there's always an objective beyond just the answer to the question. So every year, outside of this one, a baseball season is really long. It's 162 games. You're on the road for 81 games. That is a lot of time spent on the road. So if I start with the question, what is it like being on the road during the season? I have to be able to identify the objective. This one's pretty straightforward. I want to understand what life is like on the road. That is my starting point, okay? And I want to make sure, we'll get to this in just a second, I want to make sure that it is relatable to my audience, right? So understanding life on the road, because there's something there that makes us just like athletes too, okay? So what is it like being on the road? It states it right there in that opening question. The second tweak we're going to make is finding an easy swap. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to ask, is there a word swap that gets to the heart of the objective? So I want you to think about this. Type in a couple of answers here for me. I would sit at my desk and I would brainstorm things that I feel when I am traveling a lot. So here's what I want you to type into our online chat here. What words come to mind when you think about business travel? Okay, now we're not talking about vacation travel, because vacation travel, people tend to talk about with a smile on their face. How many people do you know, or how many times do you talk about business travel with a lot of excitement and with a smile on your face? My guess is not very often. So Eric says that he thinks about the delays of travel. Jill says that it's stressful, that it's hassle, that it's really busy. I'm going to go so far, well, not so far. I'm going to say packing things in small bottles, right? The 3-ounce rule drives me crazy, right? What else comes to mind when you think about business travel and you are sitting on a plane, or you're having to deal with hotel rooms? Anything else coming to mind for you guys? Because I start to think about how big or small those seats are. And I think about waking up with crappy hotel pillows and all sorts of things. Okay, so the word that I would use as an easy swap, yeah, Eric says eating healthy and poor sleep, right? Just, it's hard, right? I bet you meant to say eating not healthy food, because that's what tends to happen to me when I'm traveling. I treat everything as if I'm on a vacation and it doesn't matter. And then suddenly I can't figure out where those extra 5 pounds came from. Anyway, so my easy swap, the emotion that I am trying to get to in this question is frustration. So you can see there where that question changed, and it says, what frustration do you feel being on the road for half the season? Right? So instead of what's it like, what frustration do you feel? Okay, do you feel the question turning a little bit, right? So now we've kind of narrowed this question down quite a bit. And now we're starting to talk about the frustration part. Now, here's where you're going to put yourself in their shoes. And you've already started doing that. Thinking about cramped spaces on planes, the stress, the delays, sleeping in hotels and not getting any rest. So when I started going through this list and thinking about it from a big leaguer standpoint, there are certain things that we just don't deal with when traveling with professional teams. We don't go through the same TSA pre-check procedures. We have TSA, it just looks different. It's done with the team, not through the general area at an airport. We have bigger seats on planes when you travel with an MLB team. The seats are larger. We stay in nice hotels, so I can't really complain about any of the hotels. But here's something that doesn't change regardless of how much money you make or what your profession is. Every single person has forgotten to pack something for a road trip. Now, I generally forget to put my toothbrush back into my suitcase when I'm done with a road trip, but all of us have been there before. You either get to the hotel and realize, crap, I forgot to pack my shampoo, my razor, my toothbrush, whatever it is, Or you get home and realize, I left my tennis shoes in the closet at the hotel room because I never opened it, right? So if I'm putting myself in the shoes of the athlete, we can all relate to the scenario of forgetting to pack things. This is very similar to that People magazine section where they say the stars or celebs are just like us. We're trying to find a relational point of view here, okay? And then we are going to add just enough context to the question. So we've got that there's a frustration and we know that we're forgetting to pack things. When we think about adding context to a conversation, this is not a preamble. This is not something that you are going to belabor. This does not take 5 sentences. It is not a lengthy explanation. It is a brief phrase so that the question does not come out of left field. Because there's certainly a school of thought that says if you want to have an interesting conversation with somebody, make sure that you ask them an off-the-wall question. That'll really get them thinking about nothing at all. Because if you ask one of those icebreaker questions, like, if you were a tree, what kind of tree would you be? And they aren't expecting it, I guarantee you, you are not going to get the answer that you were expecting. What we need to do is preface it with just enough so that they understand the point of the conversation that you are picking up in. So if I was doing this in a normal interview, I would say something like, the defensive play in the 4th inning. How did you guys turn that double play? Instead of saying, how did you turn that double play earlier in the game? I want to give them just enough context. If I'm asking this question right here, it would be, when you pack for a road trip. Those 7 words give the players that I'm interviewing just enough time to put themselves in the situation of packing for a road trip. When you pack for a road trip is all you need. And then we can ask the question, what is the item you're most likely to forget to pack? I'll show you the end question, and then I'm going to come back to step 3. So here is the original question that we started with. What's it like being on the road during the season? Okay, so we see that that's an open-ended question, and generally it does what we want it to do, right? It gets them to talk about life on the road. But when we compare that to the final version of that question, when packing for a road trip, what's the item you're most likely to forget to pack? We see that there's a couple of things here. One, it is far more focused in the direction that we want them to go. And it gets us to the real issue of travel for a Major League Baseball player, right? Everybody's going to experience fatigue over traveling across time zones, right? But I really wanted something that was relatable to the rest of the audience, because I'm trying to showcase their personality and make them just like everybody else. Here's something we need to remember when we ask open-ended questions. And I promise I'm going to get back to that last point on the evolution of a good question in just a second. But here's what I want you to see about this. The 2 strategic revisions really give us a question that leads somebody along in the conversation. The challenge with a lot of open-ended questions is that when there's no obvious answer, when it's so broad that you could pick from anything, the most likely response is nothing. And that's counterintuitive. But if you don't give people a lane to go down, they don't know which one to pick it. And even though there's no right or wrong answer, the person answering the question doesn't want to disappoint you. And so instead of disappointing you, and let's say I ask a player, what's it like being on the road during the season? Well, he could talk about how exciting it is to go visit new ballparks. He could talk about how little he sleeps on the road because he can't seem to adjust to different time frames. He could talk about what he eats on the road, what he brings on the road. There's so many different things that the chances of him landing on this very thing that I'm trying to get him to answer is pretty slim. So instead of getting a good answer, I'm probably going to get something like, well, it's long, it's tiring, It's part of the job. When we focus that question, people know exactly what it is that you want them to do. And that's part of being a good communicator, whether you are communicating remotely or whether you are communicating in person, that you walk people through a conversation. There should not be any gotcha moments unless you are Leroy Jethro Gibbs on NCIS, or unless you are an investigator or a detective. We are not looking for that light shining in your eyes moment where we just got you on the hook for something. We want people to be prepared for the questions that we're asking. That is how we are going to get good answers. And that's how we're going to get to the real issues and be able to showcase our expertise. The last part of this is when you ask a question, you need to let it breathe. It can be really uncomfortable when you ask a question and you don't get an immediate response. Trust me, I know it has happened to me many, many times on live TV. But when you ask a question that's thought-provoking, that is just a little different than what the person was expecting, of course, they're going to need to think about it for a second. And it's really important to give them that time, because if you don't allow at least 7 to 10 seconds, which is about that length of time that I just was quiet for, you will interrupt their thought process. Let's say that you get nervous and they're thinking and they're quiet, and then you interrupt and you start with a different question because you're embarrassed and you think that you might have asked a bad question. Now their brain has to shift gears, and that time frame starts all over again. It's going to take them another 7 to 10 seconds to come up with what it was that they were going to say. So take a breath and wait. And I will tell you that in spring training this year, I actually went back and marked the amount of time. I had some players that took 20 seconds to answer a question. And I could tell that my photographers in the room were getting pretty nervous, except that I could see the player was thinking. Now, if there's an obvious look of panic or distress or like, I don't know, then you just go back to the original question. Hey, what's it like being on the road during the season? Does this make sense? I hope so. So we've got the before question, we've got the after question. Now, we've got about 3 minutes here. What I would love is if there's any questions from you. And what I want you to think about is how all of this works with any of the questions that you are asking during the course of the day. The obvious question might be the best question, but if you are asking somebody about a job opening, the best question might not be, do you have a job opening? The question might be, if you are new out of school, or if you are just kind of exploring some options. Hey, I'm curious, how does my skill set, how would the skill set that I have, a communications degree and 20 years in sports broadcasting, fit into the communication department that you have? Now we're starting a different conversation, and we're actually starting a conversation instead of saying, hey, I've got a degree in communication. Do you have a job for me? If you are asking somebody, what their biggest objection is to not hiring you or to not purchasing your product or service, the question might not be, why not? Or what can I provide you? The question might end up to be, what's the thing that would help you sleep better at night? Right? Instead of what's the thing that keeps you up at night, which is a favorite of a lot of people, except that that's always going to be money, right? The answer to that is always revenue. It's always money. Flip it around. What would allow you to sleep better at night? Okay. So those are the sorts of things that I want you to start thinking about when it comes to asking better questions, because there is a way to be more strategic, to get better answers and to get the response that you are looking for. Our time is almost up. So let me just finish with a little bit of housekeeping. This will be available and emailed out to you within a couple of hours. Look at it as many times as you want. Share it around with your friends. I am here to be a resource for you. I realize that things in the world have changed in the last week or so. As a result, I have another training available next week on communicating with remote teams. So, this is if you are in that remote team, it's also for folks who are managing remote teams. I will include the information for that one. If this is the type of style that you appreciate for learning or sharing with folks, that might be for you. If you have more questions than this, you are welcome to send me an email, jen@talksportytome.com. And that will bring us to a close of Stop Asking Stupid Questions. I hope you've seen how you can be more strategic, more intentional with those questions, and better showcase the value and expertise that you bring to the table. Thanks for joining me.